Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. Ukraine War news update, third part thereof for the 28th of August 2024. Not an awful lot to go through in this geopolitical video here. We're going to start with the NATO meeting, I presume a virtual meeting called by Zelensky with NATO Stoltenberg. Stoltenberg, as you can see here, called the Ukraine-NATO Council meeting for August the 28th at Ukraine's request. That's taken place. Says Rikard Jozwiak here, the meeting with Ukraine and NATO has finished. Defense Minister Rustem Umerov has been briefed, has briefed. Many NATO members noted that Ukraine has the right to defend itself, including with strikes inside Russia. There are several calls for arms restrictions to be lifted. Of course, the big question is, and will they be? Like, what is the situation there? So hopefully something will come out of that. Otherwise, it's just a random meeting for no particular reason. That was obviously, well, I think it was as a result of the heavy strikes on Ukraine over the last few days, particularly that massive airstrike 2 nights ago. Now, the UK and France are eager to allow Ukraine to strike military targets deep within Russian territory. So those are two nations that are, and that is from Anton Gerashchenko, while the US and Germany are opposed, according to the Financial Times. The reason for Germany and the US reluctance is that the Biden administration and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz are worried about the risk of escalation if Western weaponry hits Russia itself. The classic line that we've heard, and that is the rationale, isn't it? So, there we are, and there we still are. Ukraine and its supporters say that it's not the first time they've invoked the risk of provoking the Kremlin, but such weaponry as precision missiles, missiles, F-16s, etc., have been supplied, Moscow's threats have come to nothing. Downing Street admits, so London admits that consensus among Western allies is needed on such a contentious issue and that they should move in lockstep. So it's kind of all or nothing, unfortunately, there. Now, I believe there have been meetings with Germany today. If you look at the papers, Keir Starmer and Olaf Scholz have met. I think there might be deepening security ties with regard to Ukraine coming out of this. I've not read it from these articles, but I saw it cited somewhere else. It was interesting. A German warship went down the Thames. Apparently, it was blasting out the Emperor's March or whatever it is from Star Wars, the kind of Darth Vader theme tune. Like how tongue-in-cheek or close to the line or whatever. I think it's quite funny. But when you've got Germany with their history, a German warship going down the Thames blasting out Darth Vader's music, you can't help but thinking, especially when you've got all these in the Death Star and whatever, all the Imperial officers are dressed effectively like quasi-Nazis in the Star Wars films. You can't help but think there's something going on there. Anyway, I think it's a bit risque, but pretty funny. Latvia and Ukraine signed a memorandum of understanding on cybersecurity, exchange information on potential cyber threats. The countries will also cooperate in areas such as education, research and innovation. Organisation as well of joint public events will take place. So good stuff, moving closer to other nations as Russia moves further away from nations. Right, the story about Pavel Durov and Telegram, so he's the CEO of Telegram and its connections to Russia, it still rumbles on. The claim was that he was expelled from or exiled from Russia, and he was all like, yeah, I'm not living in Russia because they don't want me there because I wouldn't do what they said about Telegram. And then lots of people saying, actually, that just looks like a convenient story. I know this is kind of unfalsifiable in a sense, but is argued that that's a convenient story to distract people from the idea that actually was working in lockstep, to use that phrase, with the Russians. And that he holds a key to Russian communications encryption, and he's allowing the Russians access to Ukrainian communications and anything that happens on Telegram. Well, the idea that he's got nothing to do with Russia and he was kind of expelled is somewhat rendered ridiculous, since he's visited 50 times since his expulsion. I mean, 50 times. It's a huge number of times to go to a single country. He was in Russia both when the FSB was suing him and on the very day the Kremlin publicly dropped its claim against Telegram. That's some kind of expulsion, says Olga Lautman there. I think he is, as she says here, this is one of Russia's typical tactics, fake public charges, lawsuit expulsions. Unfortunately, the West falls for it every time. And so there are a lot of people who believe that actually he is absolutely working in unison with the Kremlin. Now, Tim White says here the Telegram CEO has been released from custody in France, but is still under investigation. Amid reports by SHOT, the media organization, his brother Nikolai is wanted for paedophilia, which is one of the complicity charges that the CEO is under there. The BBC reports Telegram refused cooperation to combat child porn. So the fact is that all of these things happen on Telegram. And like I explained to you before, okay, you can argue that it's not the CEO who's responsible for those crimes being committed, but if you know those crimes are being committed and then refuse to hand over documentation to the authorities that are trying to look into those crimes, then it looks like you really are complicit in those crimes. Whether you actually agree with them or not, just hiding behind the label of freedom of speech, I don't think is good enough when there are outright crimes being committed. And then we've talked about the hierarchy of rights and all that, but in previous episodes. But anyway, this, as mentioned, this rumbles on, and people are either really for your man or against. It seems that this is falling in broadly two camps. And yep, you've got your Elon Musks and your Kim.coms and your David Sacks and your other really pro-Russian free speech advocates standing up for Pavel Durov, and also actually spreading outright falsehoods. And here's one from Kim.com, who is due an extradition from New Zealand to the US for his mega upload antics, but he is a massive spreader he's a super spreader of Russian disinformation, Kim.com, and he's really in the palm of Putin. So of course, conspiracy theorist Kim.com, who recently tweeted the protocols of the Elders of Zion to his 1.6 million followers as some sort of a revelation, would believe this fake news nonsense. So Kim.com claims that the French government has just lost $17 billion over the arrest of Pavel Durov. The UAE froze a deal to purchase 80 Rafale fighter jets and says that the arrest of Pavel Durov is outrageous. Pavel is a citizen of the UAE and a close friend of the Deputy Prime Minister Hamdan Al Maktoum. And of course, that is just basically nonsense. This is a fake Al Jazeera video that falsely claims the UAE has frozen the purchase of 80 fighter jets from France over the arrest of Telegram CEO Pavel Durov. It's part of a huge pro-Kremlin disinformation operation that churns out fake videos in the name of mainstream outlets. So you've got to be really careful these days. Disinformation is the name of the game, and Russia are so good at playing it. Well, Russia is so good at playing it. I often say Russia are thinking of them as I know technically you should say Russia is, but I'm always thinking about the people of Russia. They do this. Anyway, talking about UAE, the truth of UAE is this, that they have blocked, their banks have blocked Russian payments for Chinese electronics, according to different media outlets. So that is interesting and shows the power of these US Treasury Department secondary sanctions. We've seen the Chinese banks do this. UAE is one of the places that is the hotbed of exports from all over the world that go to UAE and then end up in Russia. So it is a conduit of Russian money and goods, and to see them curtail their behavior, their financial behavior here as a result, no doubt, of these secondary sanctions is definitely good news. Right, and really the last thing I'm going to talk about is nuclear war, because, why not end on a really happy note? I just want to remind people that Russia is involved with the US and other nuclear nations like the UK and France to a degree, but China, we're all involved in controlling and strategizing, certainly, our nuclear arms production and positioning. And PodSave the World had an interesting segment on this I thought I'd share with you.
You and I talked about this, but I think an under-discussed sort of tragedy of the Trump era was the death of arms control.
Yes, pretty big fucking deal.
Pulled out of the Iran deal. They pulled out of the INF treaty, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. The Trump people gave up on efforts to extend the New START treaty, which was like the only remaining treaty in the world that limited the number of deployed nuclear weapons from the U.S. and Russia. So Biden gets in.
And Russia's now pulled out a New START treaty, I think, themselves.
And he extends New START. That was a good thing. But in the U.S. and Russia. So Biden gets in, he extends New START. That was a good thing. But More recently, the entire arms control paradigm has shifted because of China and their rapid development of nuclear weapons, which gets us to last week. So the New York Times reports that the U.S. has reoriented its entire nuclear deterrence strategy to take China into account. Officials are worried that on the current path, China could end up with about the same number of deployed nuclear weapons as the U.S. and about the same number of intercontinental ballistic missiles by 2030. So very bad news. And then there was a quote from a top arms control official on Biden's NSC who said, quote,
National Security Council, NSC.
Who said, quote, absent a change in the trajectory of adversary arsenals, we may reach a point in the coming years where an increase from current deployed numbers is required. In other words, we will start to reverse the progress made by New START in arms control treaties in decades of work from Ronald Reagan until now. So, Ben, this is complicated because China reportedly refuses to engage on arms control talks until they feel like they have achieved some parity. I don't know if that's true. That's what I've read. I saw Jake Sullivan, I think, is in China now meeting with their national security advisor. So maybe this is coming up. So we'll see. But I'm sure, given how much time we spent on arms control and New START and how this is such a priority for President Obama, I mean, how significant do you think these reports and quotes are about the U.S. reorienting towards China and potentially talking about producing more nukes?
So it's a very, goodness me, it's a crucial time in world geopolitics, isn't it? With this inflection point that I've talked about often with regard to Russia and Ukraine and the US and how we're kind of entering World War III. And then you've got China to always consider. And China has been upping their production of nuclear missiles so that actually it is China that the US need to now be strategizing about more so than Russia. And of course, these things are all connected. But this is serious stuff. Anyway, let's continue.
It's super alarming. And I mean, first of all, the background is that, China's long had a nuclear weapons arsenal, but the perception was it was a kind of a minimalist arsenal. They had just enough to make people back off. We have enough nuclear weapons essentially to blow you up. So don't think about taking a shot at us.
Like the French, like a couple hundred, right?
Yeah, which by the way is I've never fully understood why we need, unless we literally think we're going to fight and win a nuclear war, or why we need tens of thousands of nuclear weapons. So China's had this nuclear arsenal, but they never, even the Obama years, we tried to kind of begin to multilateralize arms control, bring them into conversations, and the Chinese have been fairly resistant to joining arms control talks. Beyond, they're in the non-proliferation treaty. They're signatories to all the kind of major pieces of the origins of arms control. That said, you're right. There is no arms control anymore, right? And the U.S. is as, if not more, responsible for that than anybody else. Between George W. Bush and Trump, just tearing up a whole bunch of agreements. I don't understand why this isn't a bigger deal.
I know.
I'm here to be for the arms control geeks out there. We lived through the Cold War, and people on both sides decided, hey, we can't live without a lot of arms control.
This is crazy.
Dating back to John F. Kennedy, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, wait a second, and Kennedy calls for the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, right, banning on nuclear weapons testing. And then ever since then, Nixon had detente, and they had the SALT Treaty, and then fucking Ronald Reagan almost agreed to destroy all nuclear weapons with Gorbachev, bans intermediate range nuclear weapons, deep cuts after the Cold War. Obama builds on this. And this was the biggest issue. When I had COVID, one of the things I did is I watched the day after that 80s movie about what happens in a nuclear war. 100 million Americans watched this movie.
You were in a dark place, huh?
I was in a pretty dark place. I'm writing about Reagan and arms control. So I genuinely think that this needs to be a much bigger concern because we now have 3 countries.
I mean, the idea is, and I don't want to sound all anti-Trumpy here, but the idea is that Trump did some weird things. His international diplomacy, I think, was the weakest aspect. None of his politics were particularly any good at all. But internationally speaking, I think it was a mistake to do to Iran what he did. And now Iran have been let loose, and just you need arms control to try and keep people in check, and that just seemed to go out the window for 4 years.
The United States, Russia, and China that have removed guardrails from their nuclear modernization, and they're building their nuclear arsenals without an arms control framework around it.
Right.
And this is, I think, what's important for people to understand is part of what arms control does is try to keep the numbers down of the weapons, but it's like you can't deploy certain range missiles. That basically you can't be trying to win a nuclear war in what you're doing. You want to have a kind of parity that everybody can chill out. And I'm really worried. One, it's just costly as hell. It's going to cost trillions of dollars if the U.S. starts to feel like we're back in a nuclear arms race. We already are spending too much on this. But also, it's just dangerous as hell. Why in the Cold War were we it's not okay, we need to sit down and have all these treaties, but we feel better today with Putin and Xi Jinping and fucking Donald Trump in this country? Let's get some treaties around this stuff,
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing when it's two countries trying to achieve parity. When you throw a third in there, it gets incredibly complicated. I mean, we've all watched half of one episode of The Three Body Problem and then gave up on it.
Yeah.
We get it.
Well, with the North Korea sitting there and the Iranians are on the doorstep and the Israelis have,
Right.
I mean, this is a mess. And because it's hard and the Chinese are resistant, I don't think that's enough of an answer. I think, you have to just try to insist that arms control is going to be on the agenda. And by definition, arms control is something you do with adversaries. We don't need to negotiate agreements with the French and British about nuclear weapons. We need to fucking do it with the Chinese and the Russians. So I hope that if Kamala Harris wins, and Biden has begun to, they begin to link AI too, because you don't want the AI in charge of the nuclear weapons. Because what if the robots decide to kill us all? So I think the next president, hopefully Kamala Harris, this is an area that sneaky. Could be a major push, or I would encourage it to be.
Yeah, I hope so. And also, Alona flags that we screwed up by not saying, speaking of Russian rockets, to get us from Pavel Bure.
So that is definitely a major concern going forward, something to think about. It's interesting that I'm going to now go to what Donald Trump himself has said, because he has been talking about World War III, essentially, the bad World War III as opposed to the good World War III. But it seems to think that only he is able to solve these international problems, and does that through just mere assertion. Doesn't give any methods of him doing this. It's just that I am magic and I will solve all problems.
We'll listen to a selection of Trump's speech.
Before I even arrive at the Oval Office, shortly after I win the presidency, I will have the horrible war between Russia and Ukraine settled. I'll get it settled very fast.
How?
I don't want you guys going over there.
And this really frustrates me. It's the kind of I will give everyone $1 billion. Yay! And I'll give you $6 billion. Yay! And I will make the moon turn into a badger. Yay! How are you going to do this? I have skills. What?
I don't want you going over there. And I'm the only candidate in this race who can make this promise.
Really? I know anyone can make that promise. I can make that promise. Can you deliver on it? He talks absolute bollocks, this man. He just blah, 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 blah. I think I struggle with language sometimes. He's just blah, 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 blah. It's amazing. Well done. Well done. Do you know how he's going to do it? No idea. It just sounds amazing.
I will prevent, this is for the spouses, I will prevent World War III. Nobody else is going to prevent it. You're going to end up in World War III. Look at what's going on.
By the way, there's an absolutely brilliant meme that someone's done where they've attached a bit of graphics, bit cheap graphics. They've attached an accordion to his hands, and every time he goes like this, he goes, and then as he speaks, it's just absolutely brilliant. Anyway, this is important stuff.
This is for the spouses. I will prevent World War III. Nobody else is going to prevent it. You're going to end up in World War III. Look at what's going on right now. with Ukraine. They're surging into Russia. Okay? You're going to end up in World War III.
Just annoys me, that kind of intonation he has. Like, is he taking the piss? I mean, what's he doing? They're surging into Russia. Okay? Why say it like that? They're doing a massive attack into Russia to try and get some military, operational, strategic, political, diplomatic purchase.
Look at what's going on right now with Ukraine. They're surging into Russia. Okay? You're going to end up in World War III. And it's going to be a bad one.
As opposed to the good one.
There's good World War III.
Anyway, so he's gonna solve absolutely everything, of course. I'm sorry, but I am going to make you watch this.
When I heard about it, how does the press get this information that's classified? How do they do it? You know why? Because it's an illegal process. You are old enough to have seen a time that was much different. You never saw heads chopped off until a few years ago. They built pipelines. And they failed. Didn't work. They paid millions and millions and hundreds of millions of dollars to consultants and lawyers, and they failed. I ask, what's going on in Chicago? Right? What is going on? There's no excuse for it. I think it should be.
Brilliant. Anyway, that's enough of that absolute nonsense. But there is something else I want to show you. I want to remind you that Benny Pie has put together ATP Distilled, which is the way of checking out my content if you can't watch a video at a particular time, but you can check out text. And there is an AI produced update of all the videos, and it's very, very clever. So it splits it up into sections. I just want to highlight a couple of absolute genius things that is done that he pointed out to me over the last few days. It can pick up on things that is just quite brilliant. So Jonathan welcomes everyone to the second part of the 28th of August 2024 Ukraine War update. It's also his twin's 14th birthday and a house is full of teenagers. He apologises for the noise, explaining that it's his partner who thought it was a good idea. Just brilliant. And then the wrap up here is Jonathan wraps up apologising again for the background noise of teenagers celebrating his twin's birthday. He jokes about his newfound hatred for children, brackets before clarifying that he does in fact love them. I mean, that's so well phrased that this AI is absolutely brilliant. So well done Benny Pie for doing that. And the other day, if you go back and check the one where I was doing an Australian accent and a French accent, it even recognises I'm doing an accent and puts it in speech marks, and it's just so well created. Just really clever AI. But if you want to see my videos split up into cogent sections, I think, and summarized without having to watch the videos, you can check these quick dirty summaries from ATP Distilled. You can go to the there are all sorts of links there, but you can also go to the ISW daily summary that gives an even more condensed version of the daily summary. And you can also do a full text search of any video that I've done and search for terms. So say I've talked about Olaf Scholz and you can't remember that thing that I shared with you about Olaf Scholz, then you can go and check out which video that was from by searching Olaf Scholz, and it'll bring all the videos I've done. So anyway, that I think is a great thing, the ATP Geopolitics Distilled here. Thanks Benny Pie, and I just thought I'd share it with you. Take care everybody, speak soon.